anyone else coming in? So we're going to start with activities tonight first instead of policy because we have the graduation discussion for activities and the calendar discussion. But before we get started, I will read the public comment procedure. The Pennridge School Board welcomes public comment. According to policy 903, we remind everyone of the following. Public comment shall be limited to 3 minutes unless otherwise specified by the board. Participants must be recognized by the presiding officer and note their name and municipality. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer rather than to individual board members, district employees, or members of the public. A speaker may speak once during each comment period. Please note that these sessions are designated for comments to protect the confidentiality and privacy rights of all members of our community. The board encourages members of the public to direct any comments regarding particular individuals, such as students or district employees, privately to the superintendent or other appropriate administrators or board members, or to communicate with the board and superintendent privately by sending an email to psdschoolboard@pennridge.org. Questions raised and not addressed may be followed up at a later time. And so we have 2 people who have signed up for public comment. If you didn't get a chance to sign up for public comment, just raise your hand when the other 2 have finished. So Diane Herring first. No? You don't have
You don't have a microphone?
No, no microphone.
Okay.
projection.
That's not a problem. Diane Herring, Hilltown Township. My comment is related to the graduation venue discussion. In the previous meeting in which it came up, I brought to the board's attention the fact that the students were paying several $1,000s for the audio and video at Stabler Arena. It's also come to my attention that the junior class has been expensing all the flowers on stage. So I'm hoping tonight during this discussion, when you talk about it and the recommendations, the fact that the students have been covering those expenses are addressed one way or another, since that money is coming from their fundraising, and that is something that they've been held accountable to budget for all these years, and it's taking away from their resources during their senior year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sue Furlong?
Sue Furlong, West Rock Hill Township. I'm going to hold my comments for the other meeting until the beginning of the other meeting, but and for this meeting, I would like for you to check the calendar as part of this meeting and see if you have a school board meeting, probably this meeting, scheduled for November the 4th next year. Because if you do, you need to move that. That will be the eve of the school board election, and we typically have people who are running for office who are also incumbents, and so it puts a real stress on them whether to go to a meeting or in the evening taking care of maybe some pre-election things that they need to do, and I don't think that's fair. I've been there, and it's just, it's avoidable. So move that if you happen to have it. I believe the other ones are in the policy meeting. I hope that you did remember on the calendar to include a couple of the religious holidays from some other faiths besides just the Christian one. Just again, it creates less stress if you remember that in advance. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to make public comment?
Kathy Dearborn, Bedminster Township. I don't have a lot to say. I have a senior here at the high school, and I have others that have graduated previously. And I'm not a math person, I'm a nurse, but I went through and I counted all the numbers, as you all probably did for the survey, and I just hope you follow what the survey said. And then there won't be any more discussion, and I'll leave that, because a lot of times we spend on this. And I think you guys need to spend your time on other things, curriculum, class sizes, teachers, etc. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. There's no other public comment, then we'll go right into the agenda. And the first item is the graduation survey results and recommendations. And I'll just, before I turn it over to Dr. Bolton, I will say I am looking forward to having this wrapped up. It's been a long time, but we were happy that we can have our new superintendent who wants to be with us for a long time, to allow him to come in and take a look and hear from the community. So I'm eager to hear the presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Cole. Before I begin the presentation, just to address a couple of the questions and comments that were made at the beginning. The purpose of this evening, the purpose of the survey was just to address the graduation venue. So there will not be any of the other pieces that are addressed other than the scheduling of graduation, because we got some news today about that. So we're going to present that just because we want parents to have that as soon as possible from that standpoint. So all the other things that you spoke about, Ms. Herring, we will be talking about, but not this evening. As it has to do with the calendar, tonight's calendar presentation, which will come later with Dr. Price, will just be about the school calendar, and so the school board meetings and committee meetings are not part of that discussion though, but thank you for letting me know about that issue. So as we set those later after the December reorganization, we can think about that as well, and Dr. Price will be addressing the religious holidays. All right, so as you know, we were, oh, thank you. We're going to turn off one set of lights just because it's a little easier to see from the back. Thank you, Dr. As you know, we gathered feedback both from students and parents, just a kind of overview of what we did through the process of that survey. Those surveys were open for 10 days, October 3rd through 12th. From a student standpoint, I put together an informational video based on questions that I had been asked walking around the cafeteria and gathering through emails, the things kids were talking about. And so I worked on the studio, one of their classes, and put together an informational video that then the students were presented during English class on October 3rd. There was a survey that was put together through Canvas. That way it could be assigned as a quiz, which means that way we were sure each student took it only once. From that standpoint, and all students knew how to access it. They had two opportunities for questions. One, they were asked either direct them towards their house principals, or they had access to the email address that was sent to the parents that was graduationquestions@pennridge.org. Their survey had 2 questions, and I'll be showing you that in just a second. Parents, very similar format, again, open October 3rd through 12th. Information was sent to them through email. It was basically a scripting of the student video, but they also then did have access to the student video since it was prepared, although I hate my voice. They had questions then directed through the email address as well, opportunity to ask those, and I will talk a little bit about the questions that we received a little later. There were 10 of them that we received through the process, and their survey had 3 questions. So as we look at the survey questions, student survey, pretty simple. Given a choice, would you prefer to have graduation at Hellman Field or Stabler Arena? And then an opportunity to just kind of have some open-ended comments or suggestions, because I find that often allows them to express things that weren't addressed there, as well as gives us some good ideas of what they're thinking about. So we did that on both surveys. The parent survey questions, numbers 2 and 3 were the same. Number 1, the only difference is that I could disaggregate some of the information. I asked parents where they currently had children. And so when you see the data, you'll see that it adds up to way more than the number of parents who signed up, because lots of parents have kids at multiple levels. And if you looked at the raw data, if you were the other person who looked at the raw data besides myself, you can find that parents marked lots of the categories in terms of where their kids were from that standpoint. The results, now this is just cut and pasted from the executive summary. So if you've seen the executive summary, this is not any different information than what was provided there. Along the top is a total in terms of all of the student votes added together, just to give you the student total in one place. That represented 77% of the student body. So I thought that was pretty good in terms of more than 3/4 of the students responded to the survey. If you look down, then I gave that information for each individual class in terms of the number of students that were possible, as well as the number of students that voted. And so I only had 2 disappointments in the whole survey. The first one was that the senior class had the lowest participation. I was frankly surprised. Not quite sure why that was, in terms of whether most of them didn't take it right then in English class because they didn't have to. They had the whole 10 days to do it. And maybe freshmen took it right away because they were like, yeah, okay, here I go, I vote. And seniors were like, all right, well, I'll go think about it, talk to my friends, and they never got back to it. I'm not quite sure why that was, but in the senior class, we had 65% of them respond. We had 79% in the 11th grade, 81% in 10th grade, and 85% in 9th grade. So again, you can see the breakdown. And in the 3 older grades, they voted pretty overwhelmingly for Stabler. In 9th grade, it was a little more even. Still favored Stabler, but closer to 50-50. Overall, it was about a 70-30, 72-28 split. The parent results. So again, the totals. We had over 1,800 parents or community members respond. 1841, 56% of them voted for Stabler, 44% of them voted for Hellman. Here's that breakdown where if you add this, that will not add up to 1841. So what I did was down here, I did separate it just into 2 broad categories and said, all right, let me just look at people who only have students at high school or beyond. And so we know they either have somebody currently sitting at the high school or, assuming the one beyond went to Pennridge, which is an assumption I made, they have experienced graduation. As opposed to the other half, and these are people who do no longer or do not yet have a student at the high school or had graduated. And so obviously, I don't think there was any surprise that the vast majority of people who responded are parents who either have a high school student or had a high school student. But there were, 500 or so middle school and below parents that responded. And you can see that that did separate in terms of their responses, in terms of where they had children. Overall, it was 56-44. The breakdown was 60-40, 61-39 at the high school level, and then 57-43 at the middle school level. From our results, the total, so we had more than 1,800 votes, and so there were 3,600 votes cast, which was wonderful. Across the board, this is if you add students and parents together. 2,300 or 64% selected Stabler, 1,300 or 36% selected Hellman. I said that there were 10 questions that were asked. 8 of them came from adults. I'm assuming parents, although I didn't look that up. So I'm assuming they were, although the link was accessible to the public, as well as 2 students who sent in questions this way as opposed to through the house principal. General themes for the questions. Almost everybody wanted to take the opportunity to just say one more time what they thought, right? I think that's pretty common when you're doing an open-ended. Just in case you didn't get my vote, I want to tell you what I thought. So that was pretty common in terms of the questions. But the 3 most common questions had to do with Hellman because that's the one that was different, right? You can't picture that because we've never graduated Hellman. So they asked some questions about how would a handicap be handled at Hellman? How would the logistics for moving inside if there were a weather emergency, how would that be handled safely and quickly? Because obviously if it's an emergency, you need to do it quickly. As well as some delineation of the cost estimates and some questions around that information that was there. So I think they were surprised that that email address came straight to me. I did that on purpose, so when I wrote back to them, a lot of people went, oh, sorry, we were talking from that standpoint. And so I did interact with all 10 of those and did provide a response to all 10 of those questions and then a little back and forth from that standpoint. I used my dissertation coding and did some positive theming for both places. Wanted to be able to, in the executive session, I'm sorry this is a little hard to read. In the executive summary, wanted people to kind of get a sense for the people who favored Hellman, what did they say? And the people who favored Stabler, what did they say? And there really weren't any surprises. I think if we would have sat down and said, what are they going to say, right? What are the benefits of Hellman? What are the people going to say? And the 4 most common themes were the connection to the high school, right? It is Pennridge. Less travel time, it's in our community. Better for family celebrations after the event, right? Less logistics, it's closer. The time is a little more flexible. And then obviously staying in the Pennridge community. I then provided what I thought were pretty representative. The top 2, and I didn't delineate this in the summary, the top 2 were from students and the bottom 2 were from parents. And I just went through and tried to find ones that covered these 4 themes, but also spoke to what the person who voted Hellman would have said. So just to kind of give you a sense, if you didn't want to read all, there were about 1,100 comments that were made. If you didn't want to read them all, here give you an overview of what that looked like. I did the same thing for Stabler. Again, I don't think the themes were surprising. A set date and time. And so obviously since it's indoors, if we say graduation is on June whatever, graduation will be on June. Inside and air conditioned. It has worked in the past, which is a pretty common theme. I read the theme, the phrase, if it's not broken, don't fix it, multiple times. The fact that there are 2 more tickets for family and friends, And then probably the largest one had to do with the viewing of graduates on the large screen in terms of Stabler and being able to see from that standpoint. Again, 2 comments from students, 2 comments from parents that were just kind of representative of what the people who voted for Stabler said from that standpoint. We have made, and it's actually still there, but it was sent out through an email, the information to the public, and so we did send out the executive summary, which you've now seen again, as well as the raw data. I'm enough of a numbers junkie that when there's a survey, I want to see that. The only thing I did to the raw data was I scrubbed it from a standpoint of if it was identifiable, I took it out. There were a couple of people who signed their comment, and so I took the signature out, but not the comment, because the whole point was you didn't know it was going to be posted, so before I posted it, I wanted to be able to respect that for anybody. I scrubbed anything that had nothing to do with graduation. Had some kids who took some advantage to go, oh yeah, and can you make lunch 15 minutes later? You know, or the Wi-Fi stinks, you know, those types of things. And so I made note of them, but I took them out of the survey because I felt like that was not the point. And actually, frankly, my second, and anything that was not identifiable, this was more in the student comment than the parent comment. Sometimes there are random words and letters that students put there that I'm always afraid mean something to the rest of the student body, but not to me. And so if it didn't spell graduation or something of that standpoint, I took it out. And so if your child goes, they took out my comment, you should ask them what they wrote. Because I don't know. I don't know what the abbreviations were, and so I always was assumed if I could. This was actually my second disappointment from some level. I talked about the representation of the senior class. There were some comments that I had to scrub from a content standpoint. From a standpoint of the words that the person chose to use were inappropriate for a public posting. And it wasn't just in the kids' survey. And so I was a little surprised the number that I had to cut out, either words that are inappropriate or the whole context of, you're an idiot if you think differently from me. You know, like those types of phrases that were like, okay, express your opinion, express why. But we don't need to be name-calling and things like that. So some of that I scrubbed. So if any of your neighbors say I took out part of their comment, you could ask me what I took out from that standpoint. But that is all I scrubbed. Everything else is there. I fixed some formatting, but other than that, the raw data is there for you. So from a recommendation standpoint, based on the percentages, I had members of the cabinet meet with the high school administration. We did look at the survey as well as their experiences at Stabler, because I obviously had some clarifying questions since I have never been there for anything other than a concert. And so the recommendation is the graduation ceremony for the school district will continue to be held at Stabler Arena. What has routinely been done, and I think I saw Mr. Bona here, so I'm going to put you on the spot if that's okay with you. Sure. Mr. Bona, we'll talk a little bit about what we do with Stabler to be able to get dates for graduation.
So we have 2 dates tentatively secured. We have Thursday, June 13th, and that's assuming we have no poor weather throughout the winter. If we do have some inclement weather, we need to push it back. We secure Tuesday, June 18th at Stabler. So those are the 2 dates that we have. So Lehigh did confirm with me today that those dates are good to go, that those dates are secured for us. We just have to wait the winter months to see how the weather pans out.
In hopes that we have them. I'm going to repeat those again just in case you didn't have your pen handy. And I didn't put it in the presentation because as of about 2 p.m. today, we weren't confirmed from Lehigh yet, and so I knew we were asking, and so thankful Mr. Bona for reaching out and for Lehigh getting back at the right time. When we look at dates, we always look, what has happened in the past is there are 2 dates that are sought. One that is the preferred date that is as close to the last day of school as possible, and that for this year is Thursday, June 13th. When you look at the calendar, Friday, June 14th is the last day of school. Students will graduate the night before. Everybody else will come to school the next day. And so if there is not too much weather activity, because we do have a day of school that we can forgive because we go 181, and there are 2 snow days currently built into the calendar. So if there are 3 snow days, we would be fine. The last day of school would not move and graduation would be on the 13th. We do then secure a date for the following week so that if there are multiple snow events and we're backed up into the following week, I did the calculations, there would have to be 5 snow days that would push us back to that Tuesday as the last day of school, in which case we then would graduate that Tuesday night. We will send an email out to the senior class so the parents get those dates on their calendars, but go ahead and post it on Facebook. They are secured at Stabler. Our graduation is on the late side of what happens at Stabler. Many school districts are earlier than us, so Stabler is willing to hold both of those dates through the winter for us. And so there is not a time constraint about when they all of a sudden say, no, you have to pick tomorrow. What my recommendation will be to the school board is that we wait until the March board meeting and make the final determination at that point based on winter weather. And we'll bet that hopefully the last week of March and the beginning of April that we will not have any further weather. Obviously, if we get to March and there have been no snow days, that's easy. We could announce it then, right? Because then we're going to just assume we won't have 5 days in the month of March from that standpoint. And if we do, then the date is announced and we go from there. But we do have both nights secured, and graduation will be on one or the other of the 2 days. Any questions from the members of the board? If the chair is okay, may I ask for questions from the audience, just in case? Right, just because of the topic, we don't normally do this. Are there any questions from a clarification standpoint? Because my guess is your friends know you're here, so they'll text you first. Maybe, yes. So.
My only question is, at the last meeting, you discussed the potential, or it was brought up the potential to move from Stabler to an alternate arena facility. Obviously, time constraints being what they are in the current year, it's one thing. Is that something that the board would still continue looking at going forward for another year?
What I obviously have not spoken to the board about it. What I have asked is that the high school administration will be scoping out PP&L and whether there are any other events, although that's the one that's usually talked about in terms of this area. They did visit it once and do have some price things, and they did attend an event there, so they could kind of see apples for apples. But under no circumstances will that be for this year.
Right.
We did feel as though from a time standpoint we were not going to do that. This sort of was a survey on indoor versus outdoor, although Stabler, not necessarily, but that is one of the pieces I think we heard in terms of some of the pros for Stabler would be similar pros. And so that is something that we will discuss, but I do not know whether there will be a recommendation moving forward for future years or not. Any other clarifying questions from any of the parents? Please.
I have a question. Aside from the venue question as far as going forward, indoor versus outdoors is something we're going to be looking at every year?
No. Well, actually, a superintendent should never answer that emphatically. No, unless the board tells me to, I guess. But no, the expectation coming out of this timing is not that it's forever, right? Obviously, there could be something that 4 or 5 years from now, the winds have changed, and there's a conversation to have it from that standpoint. But the expectation is that for multiple years, this will be an indoor graduation for the class. Now, whether that is at Stabler or not, I think can be a conversation, and we would involve the kids and the parents of the seniors in that process through that if we were to recommend a change, okay, in future. Okay.
Could you just clarify, because I know we have a lot of parents that had asked why the price breakdown was not included. Could you just clarify for them why that was not included?
Yeah, I answered it 3 or 4 times in terms of it was, like I said, it was a common question. The question was asked as to why were there not specific prices given as part of the survey. And that really comes down to my belief that if you're going to present information, the information needs to be accurate or you don't provide it. And so when I came, there had been multiple conversations about this, and there had been multiple price expectations done. There was one in April that was published that was part of a board discussion, I think maybe even at an activities committee. And that document had been posted, and that document had like a $16,000 or $18,000 difference between Hellman and Stabler, with Stabler being the cheaper option. When I looked at that and talked to the administration about that, that estimate was simply done based on if we duplicated Stabler at Hellman, what would it cost? So if we did the same things for screens, if we did the same thing for seats, both indoors, 2 different places, and we ran all the same wiring and tried to make it exactly like Stabler at 2 different places at the high school, we'd have to plan for indoor and outdoor, what would it cost? Because at that time, they weren't asked to get a specific price. They were just kind of saying, is it more expensive? Can you look into it? So they did, right? And so they got that information. I then met with the IU. The IU said, well, we've got some options in terms of live streaming that would make it cheaper. And I went, great. Well, we're not going to sit down and plan for that unless we know it's going to be in Hellman, right? To actually sit down and plan a graduation at Hellman if you don't know it's going to be at Hellman makes no sense because the amount of work to plan a graduation is not a small task. And to ask our high school administration to do that the first month of school did not seem fair. And so what is clear is that Hellman would not have been $18,000 cheaper. I mean, would not have been $18,000 more, but I can't tell you what it would have been. And so that's why I tried to say, all right, so say it's $5,000 either way. I don't care, it's the kid's graduation, it ought to be where they want it. All right? And so that went into the survey from that standpoint. I think some people felt as though then perhaps I was hiding something, and so they asked me the question in terms of to clarify it, so I tried to clarify it as best I could. I, at this point, still could not give you an exact price difference because we did not logistic the graduation, right? They had plywood on the entire floor, out on the field. You don't need it on the entire field. So that saved $2,000, right? We talked about, could you have done it in the auditorium instead of one of the gyms and still the same number of seats? Well, probably. Well, that saves you setting up the seats, which was $3,000. And so there were lots of things that, because they simply duplicated Stabler, made those estimates, which was perfect for what they needed to be in April, but it was not exact numbers coming